Be patient with me. God is through with me yet. Please be patient with me. God is not through with me yet. Oh no, when God is through with me, when God is through with me, I shall come forth. I shall come forth as pure gold. Brothers and sisters, please be patient with me. God is not through with me yet. Oh no, but please be patient with me. God is not through with me yet. But when God is through with me, when God is through with me, I shall come forth. I shall come forth as pure gold. If you shall see me, and I'm not walking right. If you shall hear me, and I'm not talking right, just remember God is not through with me yet. But when He gets through with me, I'll be everything that He wants me to be. So please be patient with me. God is not through with me yet. My sister, please be patient with me. God is not through with me yet. Oh no, when God is through with me, when God is through with me, I shall come forth. I shall come forth. I shall come forth as pure gold. Once again, our musical director, Bavon Neal Emmanuel Garland, accompanying him on the drum. Hi, I'm Reverend Al Sharpton. I am in Johannesburg, South Africa this morning, where we are commemorating and celebrating the 100th birthday of Nelson Mandela. And I'm excited about being asked to be a part of it. We'll be part of the big festival on tomorrow. Oprah Winfrey and Jay-Z and Beyonce and others will be here with us. It will be on a special tomorrow night on MSNBC from 9 p.m. to midnight Eastern time. You ought to watch it. I thought a lot about it. I've been going to South Africa for 24 years, and I was first in South Africa as an election observer for the election of the ANC that made Nelson Mandela go from prisoner to president. So I know what can happen if you believe in something and stand with something. But the House of Justice in Harlem is open. And in a lot of my ministry, I've seen debates about the role of women preachers. And now we see in the politics of today, the role of women in politics, the year of the woman. So I thought while I was on international travel this week, that we'd have some women that are involved in church and faith leadership and community leadership. Talk about the role of women in the church, talk about the role of faith, female or women leaders in the community, and talk about how we deal with the role of black women without emasculating black men. So we're going to have a live discussion. I asked my pastor, the late, great William Augustus Jones's daughter, Jennifer Jones Austin. You here co-hosts my radio show on Thursdays, and she heads the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies in New York. I asked her to moderate, and she'll take it from here and introduce the panel. Get your young men and young women in the house to listen to this discussion. I'll see you next Saturday. I'll be back in Harlem Pray for me as we travel. And remember, God blessed us with Nelson Mandela.
This is a panel that where we're going to talk about church, so we're going to get in a few amens. Amen? Amen. I'm always delighted to be here. And I'm especially delighted this morning because Reverend Sharpton has put it on us. He has tasked us with the assignment of talking about a very important issue, the role of women in the church and in the movement. And what we need to do is always think about the journey that we've been on, because it can inform the journey that we are on and the journey that we are about to go on, or we're going to continue to be on. And so I'm honored to share this discussion, to share this stage and this panel discussion with three very prominent women, leaders in their own rights, who are women either faith leaders or leaders of faith, who understand and embrace that their responsibility is as shepherds, if you will, to be caring for not just people that walk through the church doors, but the community at large. I'm going to quickly introduce them really by just calling their names out. They probably need no introduction, but I want them to tell their stories in the conversation that we're going to have this morning. It's going to be a rich one. We're going to talk about where we are today as women, as leaders, taking on the issues that concern so many of us. I once heard it said that every issue is a woman's issue. Amen? Amen? And so we can sit here and talk about a lot, but we need to hone in today on our role in the church and our role in the movement. So beginning at the other end of the table, Katrina Jefferson. You all, she's no stranger to you all. She is a co-liaison of the National Action Network's New York City chapter, and she, like me, is a PK, a preacher's kid. To her left is Stephanie Joy Griggs, youth pastor of the Greater Allen AME Cathedral here in New York in Jamaica, Queens. Getting a good book from a few people. And to her left is Pastor Vanessa Brown, senior pastor of Rivers of Living Waters here in New York as well. And to her left, and my right, Pastor Lakeisha Walren, co-pastor of First Christian Baptist Church. Like I said, you won't really need no introductions. And while their resumes, their curriculum vitae, their portfolio of accomplishments could keep us here for at least 2 hours just talking about who they are and how they've shown up in the world. It deserves a lot of mention and discussion, but in the interest of really getting to the heart of the matter, I'm going to ask that they forgive me and allow us to just jump in and talk and let people see who you are and why you deserve all the accolades and the respect that you get. All right? So, let's talk first about the role of women in the church. My father was a pastor, as Reverend Sharpton often talks about, and he would often say that if all the women of the church, of his church, left, that the very next Sunday he'd stand in the pulpit and he'd preach a sermon titled, "Brethren, fare thee well," because he'd be leaving too, because he well understood that without women, you can't really have church. You can't have community within the church, and you can't accomplish all that must be accomplished. So I want us to talk a little bit about the historic role of women, the current role. I want to talk about the continuing tensions that exist within the church, especially when it concerns leadership, and also how we're raising the next generation of women. So I'm gonna begin. I'll begin with you, Pastor Vanessa.
Good afternoon. Good morning, really. And so I thank you for that. We know that women have been historically in the church those who have upheld the church financially, those who have upheld the church pretty much in the choirs, but not in the pulpit, and in the kitchen, that's right. And definitely in the kitchen and in the usher board and all areas of ministry historically except for the pulpit. And so now what we're seeing is women rising all over the place in different denominations in terms of working in the pulpit, in terms of ordination, and in terms of licensing to preach. You see women everywhere in the church moving forward in leadership roles, but historically that had not always been the case.
Is there one denomination where we see more acceptance and more embracing of women as leaders in the pulpit?
I think in my mind, and one of my sisters here can correct me, but I know one of the first denominations that embraced ordination for women in ministry was the United Church of Christ, right? And then from the United Church of Christ, I began to see people that were a part of the full gospel Baptist, because I had to make the distinct, right, a separation, because not all Baptist churches were ordaining women, right? So I think that in my mind, I can remember those particular denominations, but I'm sure that they may have others.
Good morning, everyone. And so I appreciate what my sister Vanessa was just speaking to. And I can speak to my own experience, which is growing up in Texas. I was raised in a church that did not believe that God called women to preach. And so there were no women in leadership. There was no woman in the pulpit. There were no women on the deacon board. There was no women on the trustee board. And so I grew up in a place where they believed what the Apostle Paul wrote about women keeping silent in the church. And that's what they profess. Now, Paul also wrote that in Christ there is no male or female. Amen. But they didn't focus on that part. They focused on the women keep silent in the church. And unfortunately, there are still churches today that do not believe in the ordination and licensing of women. And what we're doing is we're setting our daughters up and having them to believe that they are not good enough to be used by God. And so ultimately, that's the direction that we're pushing them in when they don't see women in the pulpit and when they don't see women in leadership. And so I'm grateful to be serving at First Corinthian Baptist Church, where my husband, Pastor Michael A. Walren Jr., is intentional about making sure we have women pastors, we have women in our deacon boards, we have women on our trustee board, because when we have a church that's filled with women, but there are no women in leadership, that's called taxation without representation.
I need to say this. I was born and raised in First Corinthian Baptist Church. And it didn't start with Michael Warren. It started with Reverend T.H. McKenzie Sr., who allowed women to preach. That was the first time I saw a woman preacher. Her name was Reverend Joan J. Brightheart. She was the first woman preacher that I had ever seen. So many women trustees there, but they didn't have women deacons, they called them deaconess, right? So that was the first sign of anything progressive in terms of women in leadership roles. So I wanted to say that.
Good morning, everyone. And based on what my sisters shared, this is why I believe it's so important that we have to deconstruct and dismantle and really disrupt this patriarchal system within our church, because it is so important that our young girls learn that they have a voice within our church. They have been traumatized too often in the church and outside of the church, and they have to see other powerful women leading, which is why we thank God for the Elaine Flakes, we thank God for the Cynthia Hales, we thank God for Gina Stewart and the Women's Conference, who empower and affirm women to use their voice even from a young age. So we thank God for those women who give us examples to follow.
Absolutely. But to bring it back to your question, I think historically growing up as a PK, within our own church, there weren't women leaders. Not initially until my dad was ordained as a bishop in full gospel, and then after that point, there was a shift, and I started to see more women ministers, and then my mom started doing all these women's conferences and bringing great women pastors and speakers in, so that we would be exposed to what's out there, but also embrace the gift that God had placed within us, and not feel like we had to use it on the usher board, in the administrative area. And not saying God doesn't call women or men to those specific areas, but that there was possibilities and there was a life and there was a ministry outside of sitting on that first pew.
One of the things that struck me as I did my homework in preparation for our conversation today is that the National Baptist Convention. The National Baptist Convention. Everybody familiar with the National Baptist Convention? One of the most prominent Baptist conventions or convenings in the nation. The Progressive National Baptist Convention that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Abernathy, my father, and a few others founded came out of the National Baptist Convention because the National Baptist Convention did not want to embrace the civil rights movement and take a stand. Would you believe that the National Baptist Convention has on its website today that it is up to churches, individual churches, to decide whether or not women should be in the pulpit or not. Because it's too emotional and divisive an issue. Today, that convention is still maintaining that position such as that. And so it's all the more important for women in positions of leadership, in churches like yourselves, in founding your own churches, women as leaders of faith to speak truth to this issue, because the pulpits are still so heavily dominated by men that if you don't allow this voice to come forward or you don't bring it forth on your own, it won't be heard. So let's talk a little bit about what more we can and should be doing to make sure that the role of women in church does not slide back. I mean, we're seeing right now in this nation that there is an effort, a concerted, deliberate effort to slide back on many things, right? We're seeing attacks on affirmative action, right? We're seeing attacks on desegregation, right? We're seeing attacks, the erosion of voting rights. And it creates that space where people would begin to say, well, why not return to an even more patriarchal society? So what should we be doing, women of faith, leaders of faith, faith leaders, to make sure that we don't slide back with respect to the role of women in the church as leaders?
Well, first, one of the things that we should be doing is, as you said, Jennifer, to continue to speak truth to power. That is important that we use our voices as women in the church to speak back into the culture of patriarchy and say that we are here, and we will not be dismissed. You cannot continue to take our money every week, and we won't have a voice at the table. So a lot of times we want to have a seat at the table, but we don't have a voice at the table. I need a voice and a seat.
To simplify, keeping it simple, what we should be doing, or we need to continue to do, is to lead. The same way in the civil rights movement or social justice movement, our belief is to stay the plow, to stay focused, to continue to press issues. I think in terms of the church, women continue to lead. That's really, it's as simple as that. If you have a calling on your life to lead in a particular area, getting wise counsel on that, and certainly understanding how to shape it and pursuing the opportunities that are of interest to you, but definitely continuing to lead and not sliding back or not falling into the background is a necessity.
And I think we have to confront and call out when we see our brothers and even some of our sisters voice their patriarchal opinions within our church, because it's so important that we confront them so they know that they are wrong. Some people grew up in this patriarchal denominations, patriarchal mindsets, and so we have to confront and call them out and tell them when they are wrong. So we have to have a boldness to speak out no matter if the truth hurts or not.
Amen. And I think we also have to stop waiting on invitations. We have to show up and recognize who we are and whose we are, and understand that we don't have to have an invitation to be present and to speak out, that we don't have to wait on permission. Because when we were given permission, when we were created fearfully and wonderfully in the image and likeness of God. And so because someone is not receptive to who we are or how we show up, should not stop us from continuing to be who God called us to be and to continue to show up and be present in those places and have our mouths open to participate in those conversations that are necessary in order to move us forward.
Absolutely. And I'll add that I think that we need to make sure that our girls are still in the church. I will tell you, my first experience with public speaking was 7 years old, being given the opportunity in connection with Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday to recite the I Have a Dream speech in the pulpit at my father's church. And that made me stand tall, and I was proud, and I felt like I had a voice that needed to be heard. We sometimes forget that it's in the church where most of us developed, our public speaking skills, our, teamwork skills, had our first role, our first leadership roles as, president of the usher board, right? So we need to make sure that we keep our children in the church. Is that fair?
Absolutely, absolutely.
You all grew up in the church?
Absolutely.
Look where you
in
are.
the church. Exactly. And I think one more thing is that we need to also make and create spaces for entrepreneurial ministry. That means that you may have to step away from the space that you were in, from that place of patriarchy, from that place that continues to hold you in the space where they won't allow you to bloom and blossom and grow into the space, from that place they won't ordain you, and start creating spaces and places like I did that speak to who I am as a same-gender loving woman, but as a preacher, as a black clergy woman, right? And we have to be able to do those things, and we can, because we have that power, we have that ability, we have influence, and we have resources. And when we don't have resources, we know how to find it.
I want to add one other thing, which is the church cannot be afraid to grow and evolve. Pastors cannot be afraid to change their minds, to learn something new, and to lead in a different way. So a church that maybe didn't ordain women 20 years ago that you've been called to, there's no reason that you have to continue in that legacy. If God is speaking to you and saying something different, then you have the opportunity to do something different. Maybe you've been in a church that didn't affirm same-gender loving people, but just because they didn't do it does not mean that you don't have to do it. And so there is room for growth, there is room for change, but we who stand in these pulpits, we who are leading, not only the women, but the men as well, have to be willing to hear what God is saying now in this season and be obedient to that call.
Amen. So let's turn and talk about the role of women in the movement. And for all of us sitting here on this stage, we show up in this space appreciating the role of women in the church who led in the movement, whose faces were not seen, whose voices weren't necessarily heard, whose stories haven't been told in the manner that they should be told. Fannie Lou Hamer, right, who did so much in the movement, and especially as it concerns voting, right? Ella Baker, Nanny Burroughs, right, just to name a few. We often hear about Rosa Parks, as we should, but there were so many other women. There were women who were cooking the meals, right? But they were also involved in strategy. We all know that you can cook a meal and you can also say a word or two while you're cooking it and be heard, right? But they don't get the attention and the respect and the appreciation. And if we don't tell their stories, we'll lose them, and we'll lose another generation because they don't understand the impact of women in the movement. So we're seeing right now across the country women taking leading roles when it comes to Congress. The greatest number of women about to sit in the next session of Congress. That's huge. Historical numbers of black women as judges. Did you all see that in Texas? That's big. Tennessee, legislators, black women. Powerful, right? What are we supposed to be taking from this at this time, and what are we supposed to be doing with it?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, especially considering that there's a generation that is getting left behind, right? the same history and stories that we were told those stories have to continue to be told. Otherwise, we don't know our history. We don't know the power of what we carry behind us and what our capacity is moving forward. So I would say the first thing that needs to happen is, or that should be happening, is educating the current generation and certainly those that are coming behind us, so that they're aware of young women, young girls, that they're aware of who they are and what power and weight they carry with them as women, and then certainly as women of God, and really create an understanding as to what power they possess in moving forward in their individual callings.
Would you say a little bit about how you're using your role as the co-liaison of the NAM chapter in New York City to do this work?
It's funny because I thought about that the other day. Everything that I do, what I've understood just in life is functioning from the space of ministry and the space of service. I didn't get that until probably about 10 years ago. I became more present to it, and then made sure that everything that I did from that point, or coming into this awareness, so to speak, everything I did from that point functioned from the space of ministry. I'm ministering on some level, and I'm also serving, which I'm very passionate about. And so here within the National Action Network, everything that I do, whether it's project related, running copies, planning an event, or being a support on an event, is from the space of ministry and service. I'm always aware of the people, our contingency, the community, the public, whether it's in the supermarket up the street or certainly here at the House of Justice, that I'm here. Part of my calling is to serve and to minister in a number of different ways. And that happened, and understanding that ministry it exists within the church, but there's a world out there outside of the church. And so for me, it's been really helpful to, one, connect it, to own it, to embrace it in its entirety, and understand how to maneuver it. And that's something that I practice every day. I minister and I serve, and that's it. If it doesn't fall within that realm, it's nothing that I really get myself involved in.
How about you, Stephanie? So you at the Greater Allen AMA, you work with youth, and I'm sure that you mentor and you model. So talk to us a little bit about how you're leading in that space. Because, and let me just pause and say, one of the things that I want people to appreciate is that leading in the movement doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be the next person running for Congress, right? And it doesn't always mean that you have to be the one with the most senior title. Now you got to lead and lead and lead to get to that space if that's what you aspire to be, where you aspire to go. But you can lead from whatever vantage point that you occupy. So let's talk about your leadership and how you're showing up.
Sure. Well, currently my role is to serve the college students within the Greater Allen Cathedral. But also, I'm also the spiritual advisor for our young girls, and I do have a business called The True Beauty in You, which focuses on the development of our young Black girls, helping them with their self-esteem, helping them. For the last 5 years, we've been doing a girls' conference at Allen, and on that Saturday, we have a career fair so our young Black girls can see that they can be the future judges, lawyers, doctors, whatever they want to be. And so those professionals come into our church so they can see a future for themselves. And on that Sunday, as you do something called a princess tea, because I don't want our girls 12 and under to forget who they are or feel isolated, like nobody's paying attention to them. So we build young girls from the ages 5 all the way up to the age of 22 every year on a consistent basis. I go out to schools, different community settings, speaking to our young ladies so they can be empowered, and really teaching them that the true beauty really starts within, and teaching them that they do have an awesome legacy to follow. They do have a voice, and they are not who people portray them to be, and they can have a life after they've been through the trauma, because a lot of our young girls face so much trauma at a young age, and we don't want to talk about it and address it because we're afraid of what the outcome is. But they have to know that somebody's listening, somebody's paying attention to them, and somebody cares. So that's the work that I do with young girls.
how you're leading.
So I am a part of a great organization called the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, where Bishop Yvette Flunder is our presiding bishop. And we do work all around the country as well as in about 4 other continents, 4 other places, right? And so part of that work is around LGBT issues, being on the front line as it relates to social justice issues. Part of that work is also around women and children. Part of that work is around, feeding the homeless. Part of that work is around HIV and Hep C testing. So those are all the things that I'm involved in that we do currently at the church now, Rivers of Living Water, and as well through our 501c3 Love and Light. And I think it's especially important around housing issues. And so we work with people around housing issues, those who are have been put out by their families, young adults, teenagers, and adults who have been separated from their family for one reason or another. Most of the time it's because they're same-gender loving. And they come to New York City, they don't have a place to stay, they don't have a place to go. We work very closely with a lot of the shelters and a lot of other housing specialists to make sure that these people are, they find a place to stay, and not only do they find a place to stay, but they're able to get on their feet with regards to, if they need health care, if they need GED experience in terms of going to school and trying to get back into school and all of those things that people need to sustain themselves and move forward and getting into social service. And once we get you into that place, we don't want you to stay in that place, right? We find ways to help you to empower yourself to move from that place. It's just a stepping stone because you don't have anything at this point, but you're trying to get something, right? And so we help you to establish yourself in that way to move on with your life. And we've had people to do great things, to graduate from college, to graduate with their master's degree, to get their GEDs, to have their own places and spaces. It's been a very rewarding experience.
Yes, ma'am. And so certainly at FCBC, we are intentional about telling our stories. Because when we tell our stories, it helps people to understand that they don't have to be perfect in order to be powerful. And so when I present, people look and say, they make assumptions about me. Not knowing that I grew up in a house where there was domestic violence between my mother and my stepfather. Not knowing that I grew up and was molested by my stepfather. Not knowing that I had a child out of wedlock. Not knowing that my own church didn't want to serve me communion because I was pregnant and unmarried. And so in telling those stories and letting people know that those things that have sought to conquer you, that you have survived, but not only have you survived, but now you are qualified to lead. And so some of us think that our qualifications to lead come from our degrees or our bank accounts or our titles, but our qualifications comes by a heart that's been broken and put back together again. With God, all things are possible. So no matter how much we've been crushed in our past, we are still here, which means that we are still victorious. And so in pushing that message forward, helping others know you are the embodiment of infinite possibilities, helping others know that you are the dawn and the dark. You don't have to be perfect, like I said, to be powerful, is a way to help this next generation understand that leadership is not necessarily about who you know, it's more about whose you are. And that is what qualifies you to be a leader.
There is a point that I'd like you to talk about. You are co-pastoring with your partner in life, with Reverend Michael Ward. And I've been married for 25 years, and so I'm just going to put out there that may not always be easy. I don't know, maybe I'm projecting. But you all seem to do it very well. And so I think that's another model that, that we need to hear about, like women leading and co-pastoring. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Absolutely. It certainly has been a very fulfilling journey, but a journey that has had so many challenges. And so my background is in education. I served up through a teacher, assistant principal, and so when I was called into the church, It was certainly not anything I was anticipating to be in full-time ministry. And then there was this period of having to get used to working with the person that you are living with and are intimately involved with. And so those have brought their challenges, but I think that we do a great job of balancing each other. He's a super visionary, I'm a super detailed person. He's a super people person, I'm a super paper person. And so those things, have worked together to I feel, give and inspire young girls specifically to know, man, I can do that. And when I say do that, it means tell my story, not be ashamed, encourage and inspire others, and know that I'm not disqualified because of who my mom is or who my dad is or where I live or what neighborhood I come from, but that I can move forward. So it's providing a healthy model. I think that others can look toward, but not necessarily to be like, right? Because you ought to be better than me. You ought to be striving to have a better relationship to me, to be a better pastor than me, to be a better preacher than me. But it certainly gives them a direction to look toward.
I like it. It's like a leadership. It's not leadership despite your circumstances. It's being a leader and being able to serve ably because of your circumstances. And that's what we have to teach our children. So let's talk a little bit about the movement. And from your respective vantage points, what do you believe are the issues about which we should be most concerned as women, as leaders, as we see what's happening in our country? What are the things that you, with your post as leader, you're taking up and saying, this is an issue that I need to be front and center?
I think every day, I'm posting on Facebook pretty much. And my main issue is with women and children. What we are seeing now in the crisis that's at the border is unfathomable. To see children being tear gassed, and to see women being tear gassed, to see families being separated, it's heartbreaking. And I believe that we don't have true ministry if we don't care for our children. I hope you hear me. If we don't care for our children, and if we don't care for our seniors, right? And so I think that somewhere along the way, America has missed the mark, and is continuously missing the mark. And I want to call us back to and recall us back to the places and spaces where we know that God has been good to us, where we've seen God's work in our life, and we know of God's goodness and God's mercy when we needed help in our times of need. And I want us to remember who we are and where we came from. And I want us to remember the text, whatsoever you do to the least of my brother, that you do unto me. And I also want us to remember that we ought to love our neighbor as ourselves.
Amen. When they first began showing us the taking of children from their mothers at the border, hearing an elected official say, "This is America. Can you believe this is happening in America?" And I thought, well, it happened in America. With slavery, that's when you all first started taking children from their mothers and not thinking twice about it. And if we don't keep that out there and remind people, then this is how it continues to happen. What are some other movement issues about which we need to be concerned and engaged?
And we're certainly seeing it, I would say, in the healthcare arena. Women's reproductive rights is certainly something that we're hopeful that in 2019 we see more progress or attention or action taken towards that. Education, equal and fair pay and wages are certainly issues that I would think. That I'm hopeful that in 2019 we see push to the front, and I know it will take the efforts and work of women like us who are both in ministry but also fighting the good fight, so to speak, that we push towards those issues as well.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to add mental health.
Yes.
Because that is certainly an area that affects all of us in some form or fashion. And so I'm grateful that FCBC has opened the Hope Center, which is a center, amen, that offers free mental health services to those not only at FCBC, but those in the larger Harlem community. Because we do need to make sure that we're doing what my sister said, which is taking care of the least of these. Because that which we've done unto them, we also do unto Christ. And so I think another issue is that so often we find, particularly with African American women, us getting stuck in our pain. And so that stuckness, if we are not careful, can lead to deeper mental health issues. I just actually finished my book, which is called Bigger Than Your Worst Pain. It's available for pre-order on Amazon. I had to go ahead and say that. To help women specifically understand that there is no pain that you cannot get through, and that there is no glory in suffering unnecessarily. And that is something we were talking about earlier, that the church has taught us, well, if you're suffering and you're suffering for God, then your living is not in vain. And I believe that absolutely, but I don't have to look for suffering. I don't have to stay in suffering. I don't have to get stuck in suffering. Suffering will come to all of us, but we're intended to overcome it so that God can get the glory out of who we are and what we do. And so I think that mental health is a piece that we're not paying enough attention to. An example of that is even the opioid crisis that we're going through, where there's so much attention that's being given to opioid, but when our communities were dying because of crack, there was no help. There was no money coming. So how we look at these issues, how we serve issues around mental health and around substance abuse, I think are really, really key importance to how our communities move forward.
And just to say also, the opioid crisis, they call it an opioid crisis, but I grew up right there on 116th Street. And y'all know Dewey Square is right there. And if you grew up in the 70s, that Dewey Square was full of heroin addicts. And nobody cared that black people were dying every single day from what they call the opioid crisis now. So I need to be able to say that. I also want to say this whole mental health issue, we have something called Shades of Blue, something that we've been doing for the last 6 or 7 years. It's a group therapy thing. If you are dealing with depression, grieving and loss, because many people are dealing with grieving and loss, and it's not just the loss of a loved one. It's a loss of relationship. It's a loss of finances. It's a loss of so many other things that people are going through in their life, in their days, as they continue to move forward. So I encourage people to get mental health assistance, however way you can do that. We have qualified professionals that run that group. It's on Tuesdays, and I welcome you all to attend that group. We hold it right at Iris House in Harlem.
And another issue I believe that we need to pay more attention to is sex trafficking. It's increasing. Our girls, like I said, my work is surrounding girls, so I think about the young girls who are going through this process, and we are often turning our back on sex trafficking because we may not know anybody who's being affected by it. But I feel like that's why we have to go out in our communities and see what's going on, because in South Jamaica, Queens, right on South Road, there are girls being going through sex trafficking right there in our community. And so we need to just pay more attention to that issue. And I feel like a lot of the underlying issue to many of our issues is sexism. And when you have number 45 making sexist comments, don't forget about the recording, don't forget about just sexist comments that he made. We have to realize that we have to address this demon of sexism as well. So that's what I'm saying.
Amen. And one other issue that is often, Reverend Sharpton never fails to remind us all of the importance of voting. And what we are seeing is the continuing erosion of voting rights and voting suppression, right? We saw that play out in real time in Georgia, right? The number of votes by which Stacey Abrams lost were the number, like were less than the number of votes that were essentially stolen, right? We're seeing it now in the form of gerrymandering and redistricting communities so that we can have less people of color, have representation. We have to pay attention to voting and couple that with, we're going to start drilling this home every single day and week. Census 2020 is coming. The census, where we all have to be counted. What many people don't know is that the number of people that are counted in the census determines what states and localities get by way of federal funding for healthcare, for education, for transportation, right? And with respect to representation in the House of Representatives. If we're undercounted here in New York, we stand to lose at least $20 billion for education, for social services, for healthcare, mental health. We have to make sure that we're counted, okay? So keep that in mind.
Really quickly, LGBTQI people will not be counted in the 2020 census. That is something that we are pushing back against. And so one of the reasons why I want to talk about LGBTQI rights, and I know that it's very controversial, but we have families, we have children, and we should be counted. And so anywhere you see it, it's incumbent upon all of us to push back against it.
We are going to have to wrap, but I'm just going to do it like a rapid fire. If Fannie Lou Hamer, or Nanny Burroughs, Ella Baker, Rosa Parks, the list goes on and on and on. If any one of them were sitting here, what would they be telling us we should be doing as movement leaders?
Stay focused and stay the course. By any means necessary.
All right.
I think they would remind us of unity and how they were able to get stuff done because they were unified. So no longer can we push back on another sister, but we have to invite the sister to sit at the table and have a voice at the table, like Vanessa said, so we can really speak together, be unified and on one accord, so we can get the job done.
All right.
I believe somebody would have said, rally your troops. It's time for us to come together. There are intersections to this. And that at this point in time where we are as it relates to the world and society, your voice matters, your vote matters, everything about who you are matters. Don't be discounted by government. Don't be discounted by church. Don't let anyone discount who you are and whose you are.
I think that we will be encouraged to be authentic. Be our authentic self. Show up as the person that God created you to be and do the work that only you can do. That work does not always have to be glorious work. That work can be cooking. That work can be cleaning. That work can be serving. That work can be preaching. That work can be teaching. That work can be writing. Whatever it is that you can do to push us forward, that's the work that you've been called to do. That's the work that you're responsible to do. Not to be like anybody else, but to be the best you that you can be.
We're about to wrap. Some of you have already done this. You've told us maybe what you would tell your younger self. But you talked about creating space at the table. Unity. You talked about staying focused, right? Being who you are. What should we be specifically like? What's that one thing we want the little girls who are going to lead tomorrow? What do we want them to know? 30 seconds. 3 minutes. Oh, we got 3 minutes. Oh, okay.
So,
take a little time.
You know what? There is an article that's going around Facebook about a young girl who was in school telling the kids she had black girl magic. And all these little white girls start crying because she said she had black girl magic. And so the principal of the school contacted the mother and asked, can you talk to her? And it's like, talk to her about work, what? So you know what I would tell every little girl? If you can hear me, keep your black girl magic and let people know that you have black girl magic and no person can take it away from you.
No, I was just going to add say. Because they always got something to say. You are powerful, you are unstoppable, you have a future that's brighter than you can ever imagine. So anybody that gives you a no along the way, know that God has already given you a yes. The name of the book is Bigger Than Your Worst Pain, and it's a spiritual guide to pushing past the pain and living your best life.
I would tell our young girls that yes, you will go through hard times, yes, you will go through challenges. However, you are not only called to survive, but you are called to thrive. And your voice matters, and I would just help them to understand who they authentically are, because they need to understand that some of the examples that they see may not reflect who they really are.
Yes, that's good.
But we as women who are leading have to really just be that example for them and just encourage them that they can be all that God has called them to be.
Right.
And now, ending in saying that, I tell myself this often, especially when I'm having a slump or feeling not so great, that God created me just as I am. And with every experience, every hiccup, every misstep, every triumph, that it was all necessary for my journey, my story. So whatever they're going through in life, that He created you just the way that you are. You are perfect just the way that you are. And make sure that every day that you show up in the world, you be unapologetically who you are and who God created you to be.
Amen. Well, we're on the same wavelength, because what I tell young women and older women is walk in your power. Walk in the power that God gave to you. Own it, live it, experience it to the fullest. Just walk in your power. I want the audience to join me in giving a big round of applause for these dynamic women.
Tremendous panel, and I'm sure it was a great treat for those that were watching across the nation on the Impact Television Network to see not only the power of the women who stand with National Action Network, but the power that they themselves, as Adam would say, have in their own hand, and to believe in themselves, as these women have said. Give them another big hand. hand. All right, so we're going to open the doors of the movement, and hopefully some of you women that are here today that are not members of the organization were inspired by their words, and we want to invite all of you, men and women, and others, to come on. If you want to be part of this network, if you want to be part of this movement, if you want to be part of the action, we invite you to come on now. Everybody sing. Everybody sing. Everybody sing. Everybody sing. South Africa. They are there for the 100th birthday celebration. We got a couple more. God bless you. All right, as they say, je t'aime beaucoup. That means I love you. Give yourselves a big hand. Give a big hand to our musical director, Vaughn Neal. Brother Emmanuel Garland. I want to thank all of you for being with us this morning. I want to thank our panel again. Reverend Dr. Al Sharpton will be here next Saturday as we continue to prepare for our Christmas holiday. All of you that will be participating in our holiday celebration on Christmas Day, make sure that you sign up wherever appropriate. Also make sure you get the word out so we have a good crowd on Saturday. A lot of families are traveling and some don't have nowhere else to go, but they know the doors to the House of Justice are open on Christmas Day, and all are welcome, and we always have a tremendous amount of toys and gifts for the kids, and we really thank all of you here, and especially Women's Auxiliary that does a tremendous amount of work to make sure that our kids have what they wish for on Christmas morning. All right, we can all stand. Grab the hand of the person next to you. Now, I would tell you, now you can reach into their pocket and take some of their money and bring it up, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. All right. All right, repeat after me. We're an African people. Robbed from our land. Robbed of our names, our language, our family, our culture, our self-respect. But we shall rise